Yeah, so you just let me know.
That's all we're going for. Not. You really
You're on
make us
brand.
look
You're on brand.
bright. Yeah.
So you stand out. Yeah, you stand out. That's the best. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. I don't know how close I have to be. Thank you for joining us. We're here this afternoon to talk about mitigating the impact of climate change on nutrition. I think we're all quite strongly aware of the impacts of food systems on the climate and on nature. Uh, Food systems, how we produce, how we consume, and how we are currently wasting and losing food is the cause of around 30% of all greenhouse gas emissions, and it's driving biodiversity loss, around 70% of all biodiversity loss on land and 50% in freshwater. Um, at the same time, our food security suffers greatly from climate change. In a hotter, drier world, it's predicted that we will be able to produce less food, and it's also predicted that that food will be of a lower quality. So not only is food a major contributor to our climate crisis, it's also one of the areas in which we suffer most. So very, very clear that we need to address these problems. Already, food security and global hunger is a major issue. There are more than 800 million people going hungry every single day. And in the MENA region and in Africa, that's as many as 1 in 5 people. If we are in a situation where we cannot produce the same amount of food as we can today, that food insecurity is only going to worsen. So it's a very, very critical topic. I should have told you who I am first, but to add to that, my name is Peter McFeely. I'm the Global Communications Lead for Food at WWF. And through this week, I've been here with our team to really try to help raise food up the agenda within UNFCCC and to try to ensure that it becomes a central part to the climate solution. We've got a fantastic panel with us today to look at some of the solutions that are being implemented, to talk about the challenges we're facing and how we're going to solve them. So first of all, I'd just like to introduce each of the 4 esteemed guests that we've got, and then we'll get into sharing some details. So first, we've got Anna Mikusevich, who's the Senior Vice President of People and Sustainability at Delivery Hero. Delivery Hero is the leading food and groceries delivery service in the Middle East and North America. So welcome, Anna.
Thank you.
Evelyn, well, I'll go just in order. Next is okay. Next is Ali Raza Qureshi, the representative country director for the World Food Programme and Iraq Country Office. Evelyn Tay, the Vice President of Communications, Public Affairs and Sustainability in Asia Pacific at Food Panda. Food Panda is a subsidiary of Delivery Hero, and it's the leading provider of the same services in Asia Pacific. And last but not least, we have Wael Ismail, the Vice President of Corporate Affairs for Middle East and North America and Pakistan for Pepsi. So welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining us here today. We'll get right into it. I think the first question I'd like to pose to you, Anna, I'd like you to sort of, also, I want to actually go straight into solutions. We spend a lot of time talking about problems, talking about challenges, but as anybody who's been here for the last few days has heard, we need to get to action, we need to get implementation. So I want to talk about solutions straight away. So how do you think organizations can actually build and raise awareness on behavior change at an individual level so that everybody can help address the hunger, the climate, and the nature crisis.
Well, first of all, thank you, Peter, for moderating this panel on a hugely important topic. I would just to take a small digression before I dive straight into the question. It's Delivery Hero geographical footprint. I think you mentioned MENA and North America. We don't actually operate in North America. We have 74 markets, which why this topic is so important to us, because what's happening with climate around the world really impacts our customers, impacts every single point of our value chain. And that's why I'm really excited to be having a discussion with you today. So COP27 has been very much biased towards action. The many panelists have talked about enough talking, enough getting the buy-in has been to action. So at Delivery Hero, our strategy very much starts, it's got sustainability embedded right inside of the very epicenter of our strategy is sustainability. And our, thank you. And our targets are aligned with sustainable development targets, goals. And they are within the two main pillars. One is zero hunger, and the other one is climate action. Zero hunger, let's talk about several initiatives that we as organization have implemented with very tangible impact. The first one, they span across two main areas. One is meal donations within our apps, and the other one tackling the food wastage in our stores. So our flagship program with World Food Program really entails activating Share the Meal initiative through our apps. So our Tech for Good initiative in the organization enables our customers to provide charitable donations, and this way we have helped over 10 million customers since 2019. Furthermore, we look into ways of how we impact the entire ecosystem. So responsibility Delivery Hero is not only what we're doing within our organization, it is also what understanding all the drivers of how we are creating carbon footprint and tackling them head on. So that includes our deliveries, that includes our riders, that includes our stores. Over the past year specifically, we have looked into ways that our packaging is also making climate impact. So one of our initiatives is around turning single-use packaging into either multiple-use packaging or decomposting, so using the plant-based products which create eco-friendly initiatives. Eco-friendly package solutions. When it comes to impacting the entire ecosystem, first of all, we are a company that across all of our brands has the value of care embedded in our values. So we believe that we're heroes because we care, and that impacts the not only our organization but the broader environment. And this is really important to me. Why? Because we hire people. We have 50,000 employees across the network, and we want to hire people that are committed to making a positive impact on the environment. And we want people who want to leave the planet in a better place than they found it, which really starts with surrounding ourselves with those who want to make tangible impacts on the climate. But it really is understanding how we measure our impact. So our strategy is based on scientific-based targets initiative. And the way we have conducted industry-leading science-based initiative, actually greenhouse gases reduction assessment to understand which part of the value chain make the biggest impact. I'm sorry. And we don't only measure the impact of our own deliveries, we also measure the impacts of deliveries that our restaurants make directly from the restaurant to a customer. And this is, again, really important because we understand that although we're not making that delivery ourselves, that delivery would not have happened if there wasn't the marketplace, the system that we built, enabling restaurants to do that. We're also looking at creating some pilots to understand where we can make the impact make the change really quickly. So this would be in the areas, as I mentioned, delivery, electric vehicles, packaging, and by increasing the part of our GMV in creating, for example, different sustainable products, we give our customers choice of how they would make an impact. So in our Talabat brand, which operates in Egypt, for example, we have our own local store, which allows customers to choose which provider they buy the food from. And this is really important because it activates local network, means that it's multiple benefits. For example, it shortens the time from farm to table. It also helps local suppliers, and ultimately it's sustainable. And another, I'm going to round it off here and pass it on to other panelists. Another initiative Talabat that we have seen taken off really well is the initiative around virtual charities. Virtual charities, when our customers have an ability to, through our giving back section on our app, select across 20 different charities a cause supported by NGO or a cause that is close to their heart, and they can donate that way. So we have additional 4.6 million donations that were activated this way.
That's fantastic. Thank you for sharing all that, Anna. It's very clear. You said at the start that it's a brand with sustainability built into its DNA, and I think you're listening to the variety of initiatives through packaging, through meal donation, through you're trying to tackle those different emissions. It's very clear that it's not just something you're paying lip service to. So congratulations on that. Evelyn, I just sort of ask: is there? How do you see that happening in Asia Pacific? Are you implementing similar solutions, or tackling it differently, or what's your approach with Food Panda?
Yeah, so some of the principles behind the thinking of what we need to mitigate or reduce are quite similar, as also we have global targets that we work towards. But in the Asia Pacific region, it also tends to be quite driven from the ground up and looking at the availability of programs and partners, and most importantly, what the market needs. So, for example, if there was a natural disaster in any given country, recently with the floods in Pakistan, we worked together with our partners to make sure we're getting food and donations into the hands of the needy communities, or proactive programs to create future programs, or looking at programs for future food or sustainable food sources, such as what we're doing in Singapore, partnering with cultivated meat producers or providers to make sure we are educating the public of what the future possibilities could be. So I think we do it via several channels or in different ways. We look at what are the operational levers that we can leverage. We look at what are the available programs out there, available partners that we can work with. What are the things that we can do through the power of the app, encouraging and evoking behavioral change. Building on what Anna just said, we also have meal donation programs in several countries across APAC. So for every order that a customer completes, they also can choose to donate, 1, 2, or 3 meals, for example, to those in need. And these are the different ways of hunger elimination methods that we work on.
And I actually like to just ask something more about something you referenced. As we talk about mitigating climate change, I think um, I hope everybody knows, or I often assume everybody knows, a very significant portion of emissions from food systems comes from food production. You talk about cultivated meat, partnership with food companies. Are there ways in which you're trying to work with more partners who are producing food in a more sustainable way?
Yeah. Yes. So one of the very recently launched programs that we have, for example, in Singapore, and also we have similar programs in Hong Kong and Taiwan. As we operate 11 countries, I should set that basis. we also established a restaurant certification program in Singapore, for example. We call it the Green Label program, where we work with endorsed by WWF and also working with a local NGO to look at what the criteria of that restaurant in every way they operate, how they source their food, and how sustainable their packaging solutions are in delivery. We look at different criterias, and to date, we've onboarded 1,700 restaurant outlets in just 3 countries alone in the last couple of months. So I think this is just the start. We also put a bit more emphasis and marketing efforts into promoting some of these restaurants, what we call the green label restaurants, so that people know they have a choice. And with that choice, hopefully it encourages more people to look at sustainably operated restaurants. So yeah.
Great. I think that's really cool. I think it's obviously both Delivery Hero and Food Panda. You've got a powerful platform to influence people. I think even just giving those simple tools to make more informed choices is really important. Um, Ali, I'd like to come back to you, and we've talked a little bit about solutions, but um, to go back to how are you seeing that deliver? Are you seeing this delivering impact on the ground? How beneficial are these sorts of partnerships to the World Food Programme? And there's sort of two parts to the question I'll ask first. Like, what sort of benefits are you seeing in terms of your direct hunger side of things, but also as we talk about trying to mitigate the impacts of climate change, how have you seen the situation develop over the past few years, and where do you potentially see it going given the current climate situation? And without being too morbid, how do you feel that's playing out? How urgent is it to really actually tackle some of these drivers in addition to solving the immediate problem of getting more food into people's hands and mouths? You might have turned it off, I think.
Yeah. Thank you, Peter. Just maybe. Let's start. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Technology, which is the solution to many challenges, but sometimes it can be a challenge itself. Thank you very much for the question, Peter. I think I will begin from where you said earlier. Our food security systems are both contributory to climate change. They're contributing to what we are seeing today, because you have emissions from the food systems, and they're under stress because of the climate change that has happened. And I think what we saw last year at the Food Systems Summit, I think it came out very clearly that our food systems today are not fit for the growing population of the world, right? And I think three major challenges that came out very clearly. Can the food systems continue to support the growing population that we have? Can our food systems deal with the climate change and the impact of the climate change? And can it contribute to livelihoods of different people along the value chain and supply chain? And I think uh, the world came up with a lot of recommendations at the last Food Systems Summit. And I think there was a clear link established between climate change and Food Systems Summit. And I think it's great to see that today we are talking about it again, and we are reviving some of the challenges that we saw at that time. Uh, I think first I will tackle the partnership question. I think when we look at food crisis, and going back to the point Anna made earlier, when we look at the food crisis, the unfolding food crisis today, and you've heard our executive director talk about a global hunger problem, and he talks about the numbers which are on an exponential increase. And today, when we look at over 800 million people that do not know where the next food is coming from, there's another dimension to it, which is malnutrition, right? With the food crisis, there is a malnutrition crisis which is also unfolding at the same time. And I think there's a lot that needs to be done by the various actors along the food systems chain on one, social and behavioral changes that need to be made so that people can make better choices around more nutritious food. And we have seen that as the World Food Program, we have nutrition programs in over 80 countries, and we have clearly seen that when you work in partnership with the private sector, and when you work and when you give choice to people, and when you give them knowledge to make the right choices, they do make the right choices, and it has an impact on the reduction of malnutrition. There are programs that have demonstrated how stunting has been reversed, and stunting often is considered as a longer term problem in terms of the child's growth. But we have seen examples in countries where, together with the private sector, we have managed to reverse such challenges. At the same time, when we also look at the livelihoods of people, and here I would like to highlight the partnership that we have with Pepsi in Iraq, where I'm coming from. Again, when I said one of the challenges that is faced by with the food systems today is to ensure livelihood opportunities for everyone along the chain. If you have a farmer who's growing food and is not able to sell their product in the market, it's both a wastage but loss of livelihood as well. And what we have done with Pepsi in Iraq is to upgrade the product of the farmers so that their product can be sold at better prices and have a value chain addition. Why is that important? I think if we are not going to focus on the different actors, and especially the smallholder farmers, we are not going to fix our food systems. We are going to create more problems around our food systems in the long run. And as World Food Program, that's the most critical thing that we are focusing on right now in protecting the smallholder farmers, because their own resilience is not adequate to deal with the shocks of today. They do not have the capital to invest in the latest innovation, in the latest technology. So, how do we help them? By anticipating risks, by protecting them through insurance products. Because again, these are not the farmers who understand what the insurance market is, right? These are also not the farmers who have innovation. They cannot invest in innovation. So we have to help them into these areas. And you might have seen some of our products over the last couple of days with our innovation accelerator, where we are looking at how can we work with the tech sector, with other innovators, to produce more with less carbon footprint and with less water. I was in Dubai yesterday, and we were discussing one of the biggest challenges that is faced in Iraq, the country where I'm coming from, that the water is reducing. How do you continue producing with less water? And there's a role of private sector and technology here to make the food systems fit for future.
Great. Very, very interesting. Oh, excuse me. I think, maybe it's unfair, but a lot of times I think people would think of the World Food Program as a relief program, for people, facing disaster and so on. And the various different things you just described and the way the organization is evolving, I think just demonstrates again the challenges we're facing, but the need to take a full food systems approach. And we see that constantly. We can't just think in silos about certain parts of food systems. It really is. You talk about actors all along the chain. I think it's really important here at COP27 that we all champion that message as we look at things like the negotiations and the Cornivia process. It's making sure it's not only focused narrowly on agriculture, that we're ensuring that within the COP27 processes, we're actually building in full food systems approaches, because as you've rightly said, we need all of these elements to actually make the transformation we need. So, having heard from some actors across other parts of the chain now a while, I'd love to hear from you a little bit about how to build on what Ali's just talked about, how you're working with those smallholder farmers and what you're doing to enrich that production and mitigate the climate impacts of food production with your farmers.
No, thank you, Peter. And And I think if you look at PepsiCo as a food and beverage company, essentially we engage with probably a billion consumers every day. But I think what people don't recognize is that we also at the same time engage with around 250,000 farmers globally in the same thing. So essentially, we're an agriculture company, and this is where food security becomes for us is a critical part. I think partnering with uh, entities like WFP who do much more than just food relief, I think is critical for us. But also with entities like the one that you belong to, WWF and others, is that with WFP we've been able actually in the geography that we're talking about because we're here for COP27. Next year will be COP28. This is a great moment for us to uplift voices from this part of the world into this conversation. So we've actually done a few programs that touch upon both with WFP. One of them is, as Ali mentioned, working with farmers. These are, and our value, our food security, our food system is really stressed. So we have farmers who are not catching up with resilience measures, adaptation measures to be able to withstand the shocks. So in both Iraq and Libya, actually, we've done programs to help them, increase their ability to be much more resilient, but also make sure that they have the proper access to livelihood that can support them in times of need. But we're also trying to play a role in food security. So with WFP in Lebanon, which is, as a lot of us know, is a country that's facing a lot of troubles, we've been able to provide 1 million meals with the support of WFP and Share the Meal app. In Pakistan, which is also a country that has suffered from significant floods this year. So in June, you have a third of the country, essentially underwater. That has not only impacted people's lives, but also farming communities, agricultural land, some of which goes into our value chain, some of which supports the country. And we've been fortunate enough to also provide around 5 million meals. So I think we have to work in, I think, on two fronts. One is working with the value chain, the food system, to make sure it's more resilient, but also support the communities that are much more vulnerable at the same time. So these two things really need to go hand in hand and in parallel. And I think partnerships is the way to go and is the only way to get there and support those communities. Otherwise, without the proper, I think, support of the farming community, farmers making sure that their livelihoods are taken care of. And as we've seen this year, the entire food system is really not being able to sustain itself.
Great, great. I mean, you've underscored the point that smallholder farmers are the lifeblood and oftentimes the most vulnerable. I think we have to ensure those support structures are in place, and I think the finance and the resourcing is there to help them deliver those things. Um, I think what's interesting as I listen, thinking about how do we connect some of these dots, and I'm wondering if anybody has any perspectives on how we can, close some of those loops. Are there ways to deepen the collaboration between a delivery service and a group of farmers, for instance? And I don't know if these things exist. I'm posing questions, but are there ways to rules in which a delivery service can help with food waste and bring that back into farmers, or other examples where these loops can be closed? I don't know if anybody has any perspectives on how we can create more integration across the value chain at different levels.
Maybe if
Yeah, please.
I can take that. And I think when we look at food systems overall and we look at the food wastage, there is a clear linkage, right? We have seen, I think, again, in the context of the last Food Systems Summit and then later on other events, food wastage has come out as one of the biggest challenges that the world is facing. So you invest a lot. There's a lot of resources that's taken up in one producing the food, right? The amount of water that goes in, the precious water that goes in producing the food, and then that food gets wasted. So there is a carbon footprint of that food wastage itself. How do we work with private sector partners in ensuring that that can be reduced? And I've seen in countries where, especially with the restaurants and with the delivery partners, food excess food that is produced is going towards helping the vulnerable families. And I think that's one way where we can work together. I think another way where we can work together is, again, how do we link these smallholder farmers, so from the producers directly to consumers? And again, in Iraq, we are in discussions with one of the delivery companies there, linking the smallholder farmers directly with the consumers. So we have the platform available. I think the platform is with the number of consumers or the customers that these delivery platforms have, it's a great opportunity for these smallholder farmers to aggregate, to come together as a group and then connect to this platform and offer the product. But at the same time, what it is going to do is to upgrade their packaging, you know, for them to do value addition there. So with just a little value addition in terms of packing, etc., they can start earning more money. Right.
Great. Is there anything anybody else would
Yeah,
like to
I
add?
can build on that. I completely agree. And also, it's very interesting how food wastage differs from developed countries where it happens post table. And in a lot of markets we operate, food wastage happens before it gets delivered to the table. Going back to what you said, how it's packaged, how fast it gets to the table, some of the sustainable practices. So how I think we can work together. One of the examples is that localization is the key. It's very important to delivery industry that we create more partnership with local producers, and we have now the network, we have the logistics, the operations that gets to the table fast. So that's number one. And second, and we have examples that we have successfully trialed. For example, in our Qatar markets, when we said buy local, buy Qatar, and we looked how we optimize the ways. And the second piece is optimization. It's really optimized. We truly believe that's the future of delivery. How we work with local producers, with agriculture entities, and optimize the way of delivery to speed is everything. But I like the challenge. It's a really good question how we can collaborate further to exponentially improve that.
Maybe I'll add an example of what Peter referenced in terms of working with local communities or farmers. So we have a program in Philippines where it's called Bayanihan Palengke, if I'm butchering not butchering that word. So what we do, it's really a CSR project for us. We connect agricultural producers and farmers directly to a nonprofit organization which supports single mothers and also uh, drug recoveries or rehabilitation members. So I think and cutting out the middlemen, which means that the farmers potentially get more money directly, and consumers get to purchase cheaper products. And we implemented that about a year ago in the midst of COVID, which also directly helps farmer survival, but also giving more economic opportunities to the less privileged or challenged communities. So that's one example that I can think of.
Oh, interesting. Um, Rory,
If I
please go
can,
ahead.
I think if I look at it, sometimes it's also very important. I mean, if you look at food delivery service such as Food Panda or Talabat for delivery here, I think they're engaging with consumers every day. So there's a lot of data points that are captured there that are also very helpful to inform a lot of these discussions. But I think it's also important to I think a lot of times people want to do the right thing, whether it's food waste or etc. But convenience is what's stopping them to do it. And I think as more companies come together with partners such as WFP, etc., you can provide solutions to make it much easier for people to get there. And I think that's something that we also continue to think about of how to make those smaller steps instead of thinking about something that's very big and then it becomes a very big task to accomplish. I think sometimes smaller steps to get there is a much more effective way to do it.
At this point, I just want to see if there's any questions from the audience. If anybody would like to ask anything. Yeah, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Oscar Ekdahl. I'm from the World Food Program also. And I have a question which is quite challenging to WFP in terms of how we will tackle it. And that's about how does youth enter into this conversation? We know that 50% of the population in the Arab region, for example, is under the age of 25. There's a huge role for private sector to create jobs and employment for a growing population that will primarily actually be in urban context, urban cities and towns and small villages. So, the, you know, the many of those youth they do not necessarily want to be farmers even. They're looking for something else. So I'm just interested to see how you reflect on that youth component of the food system. Where do they fit in? And what's the role of private sector? And of course, Ali, interesting to hear your perspective on youth also, but that's an ongoing discussion. Thank you.
I'm happy to. Would anyone like to?
So you guys, we have
So-
that discussion all the time.
I think he was.
I think for me, it's, and we've seen it even in this COP. I think how youth are engaged is very critical. I think just removing my PepsiCo hat, I think if you live in the Middle East, a lot of the work has always been used to measure development by how you're moving people from really rural areas to urban areas, and this was a big drive for industrialization, etc. And I think that has impacted, a lot of farming communities, a lot of how people used to operate, disrupted a lot of ecosystems, etc. And now we're starting to realize that, you know, our farming communities are even much more critical than any other place. And I think that's a collective thing. Not only how do you bring much more the focus back to farming communities, how do you that you can make a livelihood, that it's not just something that's seasonal, and that there is a value chain that's sustainable, that has a linkages to the global world, to trade, and that the products that they're selling are really important for the globe to survive. I mean, that's my reflection on that piece.
Um, I would say we can think about it in two ways. First of all, in terms of using the app or the platforms, be it whatever country or region our consumers are in, using that to motivate and to encourage and inform our young consumers. Um, I don't have the numbers offhand, but a lot of our customers are probably very young. Um, well, either teenagers or people in their youth. They tend to, well, first of all, they tend to be very interested in technology. They like the convenience. So they tend to be early adopters of the service or the app or any new features that we push out anyway. So we think that's a powerful way to educate them and get them thinking about sustainable choices, or what I talked about earlier in terms of green restaurants and things like that. I think the other part is people who are directly participating, say in the food delivery business, be it restaurants, people who are creating new ideas, or perhaps I think maybe COVID has brought on new opportunities for people to think about how they can run their restaurants differently, how they can produce food differently. So I think these are the two aspects where I think a company like ours or private sectors can think about being engaged in.
I'll add to that. We serve 2.2 billion customers, and what we're seeing is that habits and expectations when it comes to choices around sustainability are more sophisticated in the next generation, as they should be, and they're holding us more accountable to delivering those targets. So it is important that we really in delivery industry fearlessly test different segments of the consumer and deliver the products that really serve the needs and expectations and do more and leapfrog more. So that's number one. That's really, really important delivery industry. And second of all, we are enabled. Our platforms are enabled by 1.3 million riders globally. So we very much aware, very cognizant they're an incredibly important part of the value chain on the entire ecosystem. And then we have responsibility to deliver value to that part of the value chain. We offer, in some cases, employment, or in some cases through third parties or self-employment options for riders to choose how they work. And in many cases, we see those options are different in the younger population. We had an interesting initiative in the region here where we galvanized youth to get involved in industry and look through different options of employment. And rider option is very, very popular. And what's very important to them is that they were offered bicycles. They were too young to operate vehicles, but their preferred choice of transportation was bicycle. So we looked into how we provide more bicycles to riders coming into the age when we're employed, because that's the exponentially better options from sustainability perspective to activate.
Uh, Maybe I'll go back to the producers and agriculture first, because I think one of the biggest challenge that we see is that the younger generation is leaving the farms across the world, especially with climate change and the challenges of producing in this harsh environment. We have seen a lot of younger generation, they are not getting engaged in agriculture. There's naturally a trend of migration from the rural areas into urban areas. So that's definitely creating one. So it's creating multiple challenges. One, who's going to produce, right? Who's going to produce food in the future if the new generation is not going to be engaged in agriculture, because they see less monetary gain coming out of being engaged in agricultural activity. It's hard work and with huge risks, because we have seen due to climate change, you can lose everything. You can work very hard, but you can lose everything. And if you don't lose because you have not added value to your product, you may not get enough money, right? Whereas by maybe going into a city and doing another job, you may be able to earn better living, right? So how do we? So here the challenge for us is, yes, there can be mechanized farming and industrial level farming, etc., but that's not going to happen overnight, and it's not going to happen at that scale. Smallholder farmers and their families are going to be key to ensure food security of the world in the future. I don't think there is any debate on that. All research has demonstrated that. So, how do we help these youth, the younger generation now, in getting better value from their farm? And that's where the second part comes in, which is uh, the agri value business. So the agri businesses linked to the farms, where small farm level value addition can be done, and then those products can get them better prices. And we need to get there. We have seen that happening in developed world, but it is still a challenge in developing world where that's not happening, and that's where the migration is even more. And if we don't stop that, we have a huge risk at our hands in the future.
A lot of challenges, but I think we're all here because we think we can find solutions to them. Hopefully, I think we're obviously these three quarters is private sector. Obviously, Ali representing for civil society. I think to bring it back, the fact we're at a COP, it's a very large policy program, and we need actions across stakeholders and sectors. I mean, you talked about a little bit solutions, Ali, from an agribusiness perspective. You all talked about in your specific roles. What are your expectations, or what do you feel needs to happen as an outcome from COP within the public sector to help drive forward these solutions?
I think there will be actions. I hope, and I do hope that there will be financing for those actions. I think one of the fundamental issues that in every COP we have been talking about is the financing for the actions. I think the biggest challenge is that those who are, and we have seen that countries that are not polluters, countries that suffer the most because of the pollution of other countries, are the ones facing the challenges. The country where I work, Iraq, for example, it's not, I'm not from Iraq, but it's a country where I work, and I've seen the challenges that that country faces. It's less than 0.1% of global emissions is caused by Iraq as a country, but it's the fifth most vulnerable country affected by climate change. Over the last 2 years consecutively, the agricultural production has been lost by over 60% because of lack of rains. So you have countries like Pakistan where you have a lot of water coming in too quickly and causing loss of agriculture. And then you have countries like Iraq having no water at all and causing loss of agriculture. The solutions are there today with the tech, with the innovation that is there. There are solutions where Iraq can produce the same quantity of wheat that it produced in 2019 when it had enough rains, and they can produce that with less water, but it requires a lot of investment. There are many other countries that do not even have the means that countries like Iraq have. Who's going to invest in those countries? And we talked about climate finance at successive COPs, and there are promises at successive COPs. And I do hope that those promises turn into serious actions, so that countries can be helped to deal with the challenges. Because I think the other important thing that the last COP gave us, and in this COP we need to build on that even further, was adaptation. We have been talking about mitigation for a long time, and mitigation is key. When we talk about the global aim of 1.5, and I take that with a bit of sarcasm, but let's keep that. So, yes, we need mitigation. We do need mitigation. But we have to recognize that in many parts of the world, in Iraq, where temperatures are soaring over 50%, water evaporation of the water channels is a reality. And in many other parts in Africa, from different regions of Africa, it's a reality where the farmers are facing that situation now. Their forefathers had plenty of water, different environment to do farming. Now they do not have that. How do we help them adapt to that? And how do we get financing for that, so that the pressure is not on the poor farmer to find the solution and to fund the solution?
Um, I think you've really pulled that out very clearly. All of the things that really echoed and resonated with me for the last week: finance, adaptation. These things need to be delivered. I think what it really reinforces, and I think you said it again earlier, there's a need to localize. There's a need for different place-based solutions. If we look at sort of a great food puzzle globally, there's no one-size-fits-all solution. And to any of the other panels, perhaps I'd ask, how have you implemented solutions differently in different countries? Have you got any good examples about how something has been done in one country versus another that has been slightly different because of the different needs that are required? Or perhaps region to region, if there's not, if within the region there's similar challenges.
I can start. So given the 11 countries that we have, they're all hugely diverse. So we operate pretty much all across Southeast Asia, but we also operate in Hong Kong, Taiwan, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, and they're all very different markets. So the approach that we take really is it's not a one size fits all. You're absolutely right on that. We look at what the local markets. Very often, it's the local markets coming to the regional team, telling us this is what we need, and this is how we need to do it, and this is what we need from you. I'll give you perhaps a recent example, which was the Pakistan flooding. That's exactly what happened. The local team, um, needed the extra lift in resourcing, and we all came together and secured the additional resources to help some of the relief efforts on top of what the local team was already doing. So I think that's a very recent example. And a lot of the other times, what we do is we look at what's going well in one or two of the countries, and we try to replicate it. Some of it requires a little bit of product work, redesign work to make sure it's applicable. For the most part, the app works the same way, exactly the same way across the region in 11 countries. But there are certain product features that requires a little bit of customization. So we then need to look at what are the resourcing, what are the product sort of timeline or requirements, in order to build this into the app or into some of these programs. And sometimes it's also a matter of what some of the countries have the ability to do. Sometimes when we do meal donations or emergency, food donation funding, it really also varies country to country. So I think it's to be honest, we don't take a super regional approach. We have broad principles that we all kind of align on, but at the end of the day, it really comes down to what the country wants to achieve and what are the resourcing. And at the regional level, we try to support and also, either help find resourcing or help think of solutions or put in, other types of support mechanisms to make that happen. And then hopefully the ones that work really well in 1, 2, or 3 countries get implemented across 11 of them, because this will benefit a lot more people in the region.
I mean,
Go ahead,
I would
Alistair.
I would complement to that. I think one of the advantages of working in multiple countries is understanding the challenges of different countries, but also the solutions that sometimes just require a bit of adjustment and can work in another country. So, as the World Food Program, we are present in over 90 countries, from Africa, Asia, Middle East, now also unfortunately with the last Ukraine crisis in Europe, and in South America, Central America, West Africa, Southern Africa. The challenges that we see across the different countries with the food systems, I think, are similar, especially when it comes to dealing with adaptation to climate change. I think there is a common thread there. There can be many differences, but there is one common thread. All of them require tweaking, adjustment, adaptation to deal with the current climate crisis. And that's where the solutions that have worked in one country often help in another country. And the advantage we have is our global network and our scale is so big that we are able to build on what our colleagues are doing in India, maybe, that is reducing the food system's contribution to greenhouse gas emission and bring it to a country like Iraq, right? The burning of crops is a big issue all over the world. It's part of the food systems. It contributes to global greenhouse gas emissions. So there is an innovation that we did there, which reduces which deals with that the waste of the farmland in such a way that it gets turned into a fertilizer and also provides energy for the farm usage, right? And that innovation moved from India into Middle East and into other countries in Africa, and that's the role that I think we play as a global organization. And I think that's an important aspect that needs to be considered also when we are partnering with others. That we are looking also at similar organizations which have that global knowledge. That it's not entirely localized.
Yeah, I think
Localize, but also learn from others.
it's a fine dance. Actually, we're very similarly minded at Delivery Hero. There's a fine dance between scalability and localization, and it's really important that you don't want to reinvent the wheel and every geography, every market, every city. It's really important to move fast, but that allows local markets to customize their specific solutions. So it's really 70-30 approach. I mentioned earlier sustainable packaging. In one market it's reusable, in the other market is compostable, and they work really well in those markets, but requires the problem to be solved is the same. And that's why we are looking for scalable solution that you can implement across platforms, both in technology, product, the operating level, but also that the local market have that freedom within the framework to really find what's the best solution for them.
Back to the floor to see if we got any more questions. Yeah, please.
Thank you so much. Lovely to see this discussion. And I would like to ask one question in relation to what could be, I mean, one of the programs of the World Food Program that has been looking into nutrition and healthy diets, and I am not hearing this very much here, right? I'm thinking that in Iraq you have an amazing traditional diet that is super sustainable, that is protecting of the biodiversity. And now, sorry, I didn't introduce myself. My name is Cristina Tirado, and now I am talking on behalf of the IPBES and IPCC, and we are doing an assessment of climate change, energy, food, water, health, and biodiversity. And, Mediterranean diets, and Iraq is there. So it's in the group. It's one of the most protective of water, biodiversity, and definitely emissions. So one not to think in in social innovation, which I am missing also this kind of discussion, and thinking like zero hunger from Brazil, the one of Lula before. I was in Brazil at that time, and it was amazing, really. They were not bragging or saying, oh, we do this with agroecology, but the food procurement programs were based in local farmers that were using agroecology without calling it that way. And they were procuring all the food procurement was like 75%, 25% of the products in the schools were coming from local farmers, from very sustainable ways of growing food, and that was one together with the Bolsa Familia, the safety net. It was one of the main programs and most progressive from the World Food Program. So I don't know if that's something that could work in Iraq or in MENA or in other countries where maybe going to school is more problematic for girls, but that will be very interesting to see how we can think about social innovation.
Yes.
Half of my students, or 30% in UCLA, they are vegetarian or vegan, but they don't think about, you know, laboratory produced meat. They are getting into products that are based on peas or mushrooms,
Yeah.
yeah, this kind of thing. So, it's this kind of question to bring diets, sustainable diets, healthy diets, affordable diets for all, and in a way that, is sustainable for the communities. Yeah, thank you.
I think everybody wants a sustainable diet, but I think where we need to make the distinction is that in many parts of the Middle East, uh, food security is really the critical question. So people are not finding food to eat to begin with. So this restricts, I think, the types of options that you have. And I then think how, as a food industry, you can provide consumers with food that's affordable, that's safe, that you can eat. In a country like Iraq, for example, it's already split between North Iraq and the rest of the country. It's a very highly volatile country, but that's not only in Iraq, that's across the Middle East region. So I think it's important to factor in that in MENA specifically, you're still debating very basic questions. And I think once we get there, we're able to then think about the other options that we have. But I think from a very simplistic point of view, the key element which Ali said is that it's not only about malnutrition. A lot of these kids going to school don't have any means of getting access to food to begin with. So I think it's a balance of how you provide the food security, but also improve the food diet. And then at a later point, I think make it a bit more diverse so that it is. I think that is something, at least that I see here in MENA and Pakistan, the markets that I look after at least.
I think the answer to this lies in the social protection systems of a country, first and foremost, right? When we look at the region within MENA, where we are now, there's a lot being done on making the social protection systems more nutrition sensitive, right? And that's the role that we, as the UN, WFP, UNICEF, and other UN agencies together are working to help the governments, because the social protection systems are those of the government. The social safety nets belong to the government. We provide a technical advisory role over there to help the government adapt them and make them more nutrition sensitive. And of course, the school feeding or the school meals comes as part of the social safety net of a government, right? And there we are working also within this region and also beyond this region, especially in Africa, in Asia, where we are moving towards the model that you mentioned, the homegrown, or linking the smallholder farmers to the schools. So the smallholder farmers benefit, the kids benefit from the fresh, more nutritious food, and it's a win-win for everyone. That has been demonstrated. So it's something that's already being done in this region, but more in partnership with the government, so that the government scales that up and has a multiple effect of supporting the smallholder farmer and the nutrition of children going to schools. But there are other programs beyond that, which is also looking at how we leverage the social protection systems of the government to address the problem of stunting for children below the age of 5. These are not school going children, these are children below the age of 5. How do we, through better, I would say, behavioral change knowledge to the mothers, change the child care practices? So when you give cash to a family, that cash is resulting in better choices for the family and dealing with stunting issues. And we have done that in Pakistan. We have done that in Southern Africa, in many countries. And I think that's the future. So I'm glad you raised the importance of that point as well. It's part of our food systems, and we cannot ignore that.
Yeah, it's I promise that wasn't a plant because it sounded like a question from WWF, I think. Yeah, I mean, I think it's really critical to underscore that we need to build more sustainable diets. Also, that as we look at climate mitigation, even applying all the different forms of nature positive production, unless there's a fundamental change in what we eat as well, we can't limit to 1.5 degrees, and we can't restore nature to the extent we need either. So I think looking at how we build those agro-biodiverse food systems that deliver the level of nutrition, that deliver the variety of foods while also creating fertile soils, enriching ecosystems, sequestering carbon are really critical solutions. So I think it's a fascinating question, but I'll not speak too much more. Anything else from the audience, please?
Thank you. Hi, everyone. This is May Yusuf. I'm the Regional Director of Public Affairs at Talabat, one of Delivery Hero's user-facing companies in the region. And I actually wanted to add something to that point that was addressed earlier, and I think to Wael's point as well. It's very important that we really resonate with the speech where we operate, because sometimes there is a bigger global conversation that the people in our region don't resonate to it. And it's very important that COP is happening in Egypt this year and happening in United Arab Emirates next year, because you get the kids and people in this region talking about things you never talked about. The West has been very well educated on sustainability and solutions for years now, while in our region, we're just starting this conversation. And to the credit of the very different kind of development in the region, we have a very good example actually in one of our markets in Saudi Arabia. Our sister company, Hunger Station, is actually have a very interesting in-app system where you can see the components of the food you eat, the nutritious value of it, which is technology-enabled solution that we're also looking at. How can you also use this really good success benchmark and look at how I can implement this in the region? It's like we're starting at that point. What actually do you eat? Is it healthy or not? And I think a second step from that can be, is it sustainable to the planet or not? Or how much emission is tied to it? But again, to avoid greenwashing, we're trying to take baby steps and really to be relevant and not to be detached from the actual issues on the ground. But definitely technology and what we do, especially from where we sit, there is a huge value. And we're just starting this conversation, but we are super committed. I'm very happy to work on that. Thank you.
I think adding to that in terms of like technology, right? I mean, two or three additional point comes to mind. You know, you make people may ask, what, how can a company like ours, food delivery, be part of this conversation? Is the access that we have to millions of customers, is the technology that we have in our hands, that we can use the system to do good, to connect, to educate. I think that's really important as well. And another point that comes to mind when we talk about young farmers, in Singapore, where I'm from, we actually see a lot of new food tech companies, people who are creating vertical farms and alternative, protein sources, and sort of this category of the future of food, because Singapore does have a initiative to try to sustain our own food sources by 2030, because a lot of our food are mostly imported. So I think technology actually excites and creates and breeds a new generation of farmer technologists, if you will. I've just met a couple of them at the Singapore Pavilion this morning, and they're all well, I call them younger generation. I don't actually know how they are. They look very young, anyways. Perhaps in the 20s and 30s, people who are trying to change how food is created, and to me, that's pretty incredible, to think that we're creating this category of, maybe we can even call them, they're the new technology farmers that we never had before. And I find that so encouraging to see in the younger generation.
Any other question, Rena?
Thank you. Thank you for the conversation. I'm Marina from WWF UAE, so colleague of Peter's. So obviously in this part of the world, we rely a lot on importing food. So I'm just wondering in general, also very relevant for all of you, how do you incorporate resilience or climate resilience for your supply chain? Because obviously that's one of the biggest risks for the global food trade. So I'm just wondering if you have considered that and how do you integrate that? So thank you.
Yeah,
It's a very good
I
question.
think as a producer of food, we can answer that. Can shed some light on that, Marina. So I think in our line of business, it's essential that we localize as much as possible, and we build the entire value chain locally. So outside of the beverage business that we're probably mostly famous for, we have a very strong foods business. So in that foods business, like in the GCC, for example, we try to localize our manufacturing so that it's end to end linked to our potato growers, corn growers, etc. And what we find that that does is that also creates an ecosystem around it that also supports other type of foods being produced in the country. So I think our focus has always been in trying to localize, reduce the importation of products, because it also helps us in getting to our 2040 net zero target of trying to move products across borders. And it's even more critical this year as we saw how to manage the supply chain. It's important to act globally, but in a very local perspective, I would say. We're not going to be able to localize everything everywhere, but as much as possible, we find that that really is help, at least from our side as Copsa.
It's thank you, Marina. You asked brilliant question towards the end of the discussion. And although we don't produce food, one of our core pillars of our sustainability strategy is around groceries. And one of the underlying area of focus for us is sustainable agriculture. So this is where we work kind of to the upstream partners to educate and to help them operate in a more sustainable way, to be more efficient. So specifically, our Korean brand Uber is build the entire educational facility to do that when they bring them in, when they bring suppliers in for education, also to share the metrics of what great looks like and how they can optimize their processes and therefore optimize the entire process, the entire chain. So that's one of the examples.
Does anybody else have any burning points they'd like to make or ask, either on the floor or on the stage? We do. There we go. Keep it going.
No, very sorry. Just a comment.
We love it. Keep
No,
going.
you know, WFP did a study in Tunisia, and we've done it in many countries. It's called Cost of Diet.
Cost of diet.
Cost of diet. And what it essentially shows is that if we look at a sort of a staple diet where we only fulfill the kilocalorie requirements, compared to a diet that is actually healthy and nutritious, it's 4.5 times more expensive. And that means that poor people, food insecure people, they cannot afford a healthy diet. This is a big, big issue. So that's one thing I wanted to say, just as a comment. The other thing I also wanted to mention is that I can't remember exactly which newspaper published this, but they were looking at the, let's say, dietary diversity changes at a global level over time. And it's frightening. And it's part of, why our food systems are so fragile, because we're growing less and less crops. We're eating less and less different types of food, while, 50 to 100 years ago, we might have eaten, maybe only 20% ate the top 5 crops in this world. Now we're looking at 80% of people eat the same 5 to 10 different types of food. And that means that our systems are very sensitive, very fragile. For example, if wheat is affected, this is what's happening now. All of a sudden, big effort needed on diversifying our diets as part of building resilience also in terms of trade and food systems at a global level. So I just wanted to add that thought. Thank you.
Excellent point. Yeah, thank you.
Great points. Thank you for making them. Couldn't agree more. I think the finance side is critical again. You're looking at the true cost of food and understanding how do we repurpose financial subsidies so that producers are rewarded for both the way they produce and what they produce, and the private sector encourage that through their pricing and purchasing and procurement as well. We look at, these are major issues that are going to be part of the solutions, and they're win-win-win. They're good for nature, they're good for people, they're good for climate. So, for me, I think just to wrap up and look at some of the key takeaways, I think what I got out of this, I thought it was a fantastic panel, very, very interesting. I don't think I said it at the start, but I've spent the last 15 years in Asia. Very refreshing for me to be part of a group and a panel that is a very diverse set of countries, diverse regions, but also not Eurocentric or Western-centric. And we talked about the very unique context, the challenges that are being tackled here. Quite enjoyed it, not having some of these bigger sort of imposed ideas put on top of it sometimes. So I think some of the things that came out for me were very much the need to take a full food systems approach, from farm to fork, through the way food is produced, the way it's consumed, trying to avoid food loss and waste and build circularity where possible. The need certainly when it comes to climate change and climate resilience to both mitigate and adapt. We need to focus on reducing the greenhouse gas emissions, but again, very clearly in this region, adaptation is going to be a very, very key component of how we deal with climate change. I think one thing that stood out to me, and I come back to, is I think the private sector is extremely important. And again, in the blue zone, obviously the private sector is of lower representation, we'll say, but the private sector is extremely important and very often can move more quickly. I think all we have to do is look at how negotiations go sometimes, but the private sector can make decisions and act. And you talked about implementing solutions and being nimble, certainly technology being applied. So I think we need to encourage and support that as civil society organizations and as public sector. But then that really brings me through to the last point. I think it's made at the very start. What's going to be key to delivering all of this is partnership and working across the public sector, the private sector, and civil society all together. And it's that sort of united effort and building targeted programs that bring everybody's expertise is what's going to really help us build the solutions that can help us achieve the goals and to solve the hunger, climate, and nature crisis. So with that, thank you very much, everybody, for coming, and enjoy the rest of your evening and your Saturday night and your Sunday off.